Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Welcome to Policy and Rights, the show about human rights and government policy. You're listening to Policy and Rights here on Depictions Media Radio, and your host is Michael Clogs. Welcome back, everyone, and the issues at hand: Afghanistan, jobs lost, global pandemic, economic recovery, housing, affordable housing that everybody can have a home. These are just some of the issues that are involved in election 2021. And the four leaders have spoken about it. They in some cases have presented plans. But what are we really expecting from them? Because now we've had the liberal government talk about mandates for vaccination, that there will be consequences if you do not get vaccinated. This is supposed to be a democratic society. A democratic society doesn't mandate that you go to a doctor. It doesn't mandate that we get vaccinated. They guide, they provide data, and they're transparent about all the agendas at hand. And have we seen that from the major parties? Have we actually seen that? Have we seen transparency in where subsidies have gone to big businesses? Have we seen the transparency that showed that, hey, the government ensured that if that subsidy was for workers, that it went to workers? Have we seen transparency in all the areas that we need to see transparency? Is our government, and has our government, conservative or liberal, been an open book to us? And if not, why aren't we demanding it? During this pandemic, the data hasn't been just openly shared. It's been processed, and it has been put into a story that would scare us in a direction. If we're a democratic society, aren't we intelligent enough to decide for ourselves what it is that we need to do as a society? So, it is now election time. And this is where we do actually, beyond a shadow of a doubt, get to voice our opinion. But in order for us to voice an opinion, we have to feed our minds with the right information, the best information, and that would be the raw data. Not the information colored or the mudslinging that would force us into an emotional situation for or against one group. We need data. We need to know where each party stands and what they stand for, not what they stand against. We've been listening to what it is that each party stands against for a while, and we still have climate crisis. We still have a pandemic. We still have people who are homeless. We still have people that are homeless because of mental health. We still have issues at hand. We still have people that are tossed aside because they're considered to be a minority and not those of privilege. We still have these issues. So it is September 20th. We get to decide who is going to take the reins of the government and which coalition it will actually be to guide us through the pandemic and to guide us through other issues at hand, such as Afghanistan, world starvation, and how we're going to appear and help on a global scene. So let's listen to what the candidates have to offer us. Some are very short messages, other longer messages. Some messages are full of information and a message. Others we have yet to see. So let's listen and listen with an open mind so that we can decide who we need to vote for. Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
Thank you, everyone. Hello. Bonjour tout le monde. Merci d'être ici avec nous aujourd'hui. Thank you very much for being with us today. We are here in Regent Park, and later on we will be visiting a community food program. And it's an important location to talk about food security, something that this community and of course our entire country is struggling with. Alors aujourd'hui, après la conférence de presse, je vais visiter un de nos centres où il y a une distribution d'aliments pour les membres de la communauté. Ici, nous sommes dans un quartier de faible revenu, où il y a beaucoup de gens qui dépendent sur la distribution d'aliments, surtout pendant la pandémie. Before beginning with my remarks today on food security, I did just want to highlight a tweet that I put out earlier and come back again to what I have been saying repeatedly during our campaign and repeatedly during my time as a leader, which is that if we want good people who are committed to public service and to being of service and to offering their experience and their talent to tackling the big challenges and the big ideas and the big opportunities that Canada has, then we need to make politics a more welcoming place. Part of making politics a more welcoming place is to ensure that everyone involved in the political process is responsible for their words, is careful with their words, and doesn't do anything to sow division or to create a misapprehension or misrepresentation when it's at all possible. In the case of an article that was printed today in La Presse online, I don't know if it's in the print edition. It was said that I could not name one single Green Party candidate in Quebec. Now, of course, this is ridiculous. I recently appointed Quebec candidates to my shadow cabinet. I was in contact with those members as recently as yesterday. The idea that someone in my position, in my role, could not name any candidates from Quebec is offensive. And we did ask the journalist concerned to retract that. She has not, the newspaper has not. And I think that really is a shame. I have a very high threshold, and I believe that journalists and the media have a very important role to play in our democracy, in elections and campaigns. But it is important to do that with integrity. And in this case, I do not believe that the journalistic standards that one should reasonably expect, were followed. And so I hope that there will be a retraction, or I hope that the transcript of our call will be published. There is a recording of it. We don't have it, but the journalist does. What I did say is that every single one of our candidates in Quebec is a star. And that I wasn't going to single out any particular candidate because I appreciated the investment and their time and the passion that they have brought to their campaigns. And so if I was going to name any star candidates, I would name them all. And I thank them again. Alors en français, parce que c'était un journal français, c'est très important, et comme j'ai dit souvent pendant la campagne et même avant la campagne, pendant mon période comme chef du Parti vert du Canada, si on veut attirer le meilleur talent aux politiques, si on veut assurer que les meilleures idées soient là au Parlement et qui soient là autour du table, quand on considère les grands enjeux, quand on considère les défis, comment lutter contre les grands défis et comment profiter des opportunités, il faut que notre vie politique soit plus accueillante. Et malheureusement, pour l'instant, ce n'est pas suffisamment. Tout le monde a un rôle à jouer, les partis politiques, les politiciens, mais aussi le média aussi. Moi, j'ai un très haut tolérant. Je sais que le média a un rôle énormément important à jouer pendant les élections. Je le respecte et j'accepte que pas tous les reportages sur moi vont être positifs, mais ça doit être honnête. Alors, quand la presse aujourd'hui a dit que moi, autant que chef du Parti vert, n'étais pas capable de nommer aucun candidat ou candidate vert au Québec, ça suffit, hein. J'ai un nombre de candidats provenant de Québec dans mon cabinet fantôme. Je suis en régulier contact avec eux. J'étais en contact avec eux hier. Alors l'idée de quelqu'un dans ma position ne peut pas nommer aucun candidat ou candidate québécois ou québécoise est ridicule. Nous avons demandé à la presse de corriger l'erreur. Ils insistent qu'ils ne vont pas le faire. Et je dis que ce type de mésinformation, de désinformation, que ça limite notre progrès politique. C'est quelque chose qui compromet la possibilité d'attirer des bonnes personnes qui ne veulent pas voir leur caractère assassiné dans la presse. Alors, tout le monde doit faire mieux. On doit travailler ensemble vers ce but. And so I know that's taken up a lot of time, but I'm going to draw our attention to two particular things related to food security. One is the national element and one is the local element. So the first thing to remember is that food security is national security. And we learned this the hard way during the early days of the pandemic, when many areas in our country were at risk of running out of food supplies. We know whether it's 3 days.
Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for being here today. We're here, I respectfully acknowledge that we're here today on the unceded and traditional territory of the Coquitlam First Nation, and we thank them. They continue to live here and steward this land, and as also the water and all that is above and below. I'm Benita Zarillo. I'm the NDP candidate here for Port Moody Coquitlam, and I've had the honor of being a city councillor here for the last 8 years. And I have to say that it's gotten harder for people to get by in this community. Certainly, I've learned over the years how to fight for people. And with the current housing crisis, we've found it that more and more families are having to move farther and farther away from our community to make ends meet. with the Justin Trudeau housing crisis, they have not been able to stay in the communities where they were raised, where they were born, and where the rest of their parents and much of their family lives. Now, Jagmeet Singh, welcome. Jagmeet Singh and his team is ready to take on this housing crisis head on. We are willing to and ready to represent you, fight for you in the community. I wanted to just go ahead and introduce Jagmeet Singh today. I'm so happy that he's come out to the Tri-Cities again. Thank you, Jagmeet.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I want to say a huge thank you to Benita Zarrillo. You got to hear a bit of her passion for her community. She is someone that's long been a fighter for the people of Port Moody Coquitlam. She cares deeply, and as you can hear, she wants to solve the problems that people are going through. And one of those big problems is housing. Donc, dans cette communauté, on a vu les impacts de la crise du logement. C'est vraiment une crise qui frappe fort à travers le pays et on veut faire face à cette crise. Avec Justin Trudeau comme Premier ministre, la situation s'est empirée. Et on est dans une situation maintenant où les gens qui veulent rester chez eux, dans leur communauté, dans leur ville, ne peuvent pas à cause du frais de logement parce que ça coûte trop cher. C'est impossible de trouver un logement abordable. On veut régler ça et une chose on veut faire, c'est on veut faire face aux riches investisseurs qui utilisent le marché immobilier pour gagner des profits. On a des mesures pour faire face à ça. On veut aussi aider dans la construction de 500 000 nouveaux logements sociaux et abordables. So what we want to do today, we're announcing our plan to tackle this housing crisis. One of the big problems that we're seeing is that very wealthy investors are using the housing market like a stock market. And we want to tackle that. We want to get big money out of housing. So if someone here in Port Moody Coquitlam is looking to buy their home, they shouldn't have to compete with people with deep pockets that are gaming the housing market like a stock market. They shouldn't have to put up with that. And so one of the ways we're going to tackle that is by increasing the capital gains tax. We want to increase it up to 75%, bringing it back to what it used to be not too long ago. The Liberals changed that, and in doing that, really encouraged property flipping and made it so that more and more people were using the housing market like a stock market. We want to stop that. We know that people need to find a home that they can afford. The other thing that we know, and it's particularly important here in BC, is we've seen how directly money laundering and criminal activity are driving up the cost of housing. We can also tackle that. And while the BC NDP has done a lot to tackle it provincially, it's really something that needs federal partnership. The federal government is in the best position to tackle money laundering and to tackle the illegal activities that are driving up the cost of housing. Together, we can tackle the housing crisis, but it's going to take courage, it's going to take making it a priority, and it's going to take New Democrats. So you have a choice in this election. You can vote for the Liberals who've made this housing crisis even worse, have made it even harder for people to afford homes. Here in Port Moody Coquitlam, we say the average home has gone up nationally over $300,000. Here in Port Moody Coquitlam, it's over the average. It's higher than that. We can fix this. If you want to fix this, though, you've got to come out and vote. You've got to vote New Democrat to tackle the housing crisis so that you and your families can find a place that's in your budget, so your children can find a place that they can actually afford and stay in their communities. We can do this, and that's what we're committed to doing today. Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup. Et avec ça, je suis prêt pour vos questions.
First question, we have Kevin Gallagher from CTV News.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So we've heard from the United States today that they're actually advising Americans not to come to Canada because of our COVID-19 situation. Of course, we haven't opened up both sides here. We've just allowed them to come, Americans to come to Canada. But what do you think this says about our situation? Should we reevaluate sending or opening up travel, non-essential travel, for Canadians to go to the other side of the border?
I appreciate the question. One of the things that I think about anytime I think about border crossing are the border towns in Canada, where lots of people have been really isolated from their friends, their family, their lives. A lot of cities, I grew up in Windsor. In a city like Windsor, people are so interconnected. So this limit on being able to travel across the border has been very, very tough. That being said, we also need to know that we are making decisions that are in the best interest of keeping people safe. And to do that, we've got to follow the expert advice that we get from public health, and we've got to make good decisions around how we keep people safe. One of the things, though, that Justin Trudeau has not done a good job with is making sure there's clear transparency around when we're going to open up, how that's going to look like, when that's going to happen. We need to know a plan so that people can plan their lives.
For my follow-up, I just want to ask about today's announcement. So you're going to raise capital gains taxes on, selling a second residence, non-primary house. Canada's economy, according to StatsCan, actually shrunk. It contracted in the second quarter 1.1%, largely due to declining home sales. So is there any concern that many of your policies involve raising taxes to try and incentivize less purchasing, but could that also affect overall long-term economic growth?
This is a really important question. It's about the type of economic growth that we want. We don't want economic growth to be driven by rich investors that want to make profit off of housing, or foreign investors that see an opportunity to invest in our Canadian housing market, driving up the cost of housing for Canadians who can't afford a home. So what we want to do is to unlock the ability of Canadians to buy their own home. And to do that, we need to tackle the housing prices. We need to build more homes that are in people's budgets. And that's really our goal. We want to make sure that people can find a home they can afford. We want young people who are thinking that they can never own a home ever in their lifetimes to not have that despair and have hope instead, that we can actually fix this problem and make sure that they can own a home. And that's what we want to do. We want to incentivize Canadians here in our country being able to own a home. And these are some of the steps that we're taking to make that happen.
Next question, Abigail Bimman from Global News.
Hi, good morning.
Hey there.
The Liberals have announced a plan to also target home flippers if somebody hasn't held a property for 12 months. Your release talks about people who renovate them quickly. I'm wondering if there's a specific target attached to that.
The big difference, the Liberal plan is really just delaying the problem. It's not actually solving the problem. It's just about putting a timeline in place. Our measure is to fix what the Liberals broke, the system that they messed up by increasing or by reducing capital gains, which really encouraged more of that using, this is just the wealthiest. 88% of the folks that use the capital gains tax to their advantage are the 1%, are the wealthiest. So we want to tackle the fact that this market, the housing market, is being used by super wealthy to make it harder for everyday folks to actually buy their first home. And so that's our approach, and that's what we're going to do.
When Aaron O'Toole came out with his housing plan, your party slammed it for having a bunch of loopholes. But I just asked you about a time limit for this, and you didn't give me a specific answer. And a lot of this seems vague. So when you talk about wealthy speculators, what about people who own a cottage? Or can you give more specifics about who exactly you're targeting and how this plan will be enacted?
Surely. We're talking about increasing the capital gains tax immediately so that it will discourage people who are using the housing market as a stock market. This does not at all include folks that have a cottage, folks that are farmers and their farm property. This is strictly about getting at people who aren't living in their homes, they're using it to make money. That's what we're trying to get at. And to do that, we are going to increase the capital gains tax to make it happen. We also want to get at some of the criminal activity that's driving up the cost of housing. We want to get at money laundering. We want to get at the illegal activity that's driving up the cost of housing. So we can do this. The housing market or the housing crisis has only gotten worse with Justin Trudeau in power for the past 6 years. We are going to invest to make this better for people.
Prochaine question, Sébastien Desrosiers, Radio-Canada.
Bonjour, Monsieur Singh. Le chef... Pardon, problème technique. Voilà. Alors, rebonjour. Le chef du Bloc québécois, ce matin, a parlé de laïcité. Il a rappelé une demande du gouvernement du Québec, c'est-à-dire que tous les partis s'engagent à ne pas financer de contestation judiciaire de la loi 21 au Québec. Pourquoi croyez-vous que le chef du Bloc québécois insiste là-dessus aujourd'hui et vous engagez-vous à respecter cette demande de Québec?
Premièrement, je veux dire clairement, on est pour la laïcité. On est pour la séparation entre l'Église et l'État. C'est essentiel et je comprends au Québec comment c'était difficile parce que on avait une approche où l'Église avait trop de pouvoir sur la vie des gens et comment ça a fait mal aux femmes en particulier, comment ça a brisé les droits de communauté LGBTQ. Donc on est pour la laïcité, on est pour les droits des gens, on est pour les droits des femmes et les droits des communautés LGBTQ. Et avec la question de contestation, c'est un processus indépendant et ça doit rester indépendant. Ça ne doit pas être les politiciens qui disent oui ou non si quelqu'un peut contester une loi. On doit garder un système indépendant pour que les gens puissent faire une contestation.
In English, please.
We absolutely, fundamentally believe in the separation of church and state. Of course we do. In fact, we've seen how the impact of the church on the lives of people in Quebec meant that women had less rights, less access to things like the right to have an abortion, how it directly impacted the LGBTQ community. So, of course, we believe in that separation and we will continue to support that. When it comes to the process by which people can apply to challenge a law, that process should obviously remain independent. It shouldn't be that a politician can tell someone they can or can't contest a law and that they will or will not have funding to do so. That obviously should remain independent from politicians. And so we will support that remaining independent.
Je reviens au propos de M. Blanchet. Il vous a accusé aujourd'hui et à plusieurs reprises depuis le début de la campagne de traiter les Québécois de racistes ou du moins de soutenir de tels propos. Craignez-vous que votre position sur la loi 21, par exemple, vous nuise au Québec?
Pas du tout. Et je vais être clair, il n'y a pas une position unanime au Québec. Il y a plusieurs Québécois, des millions de Québécois et Québécoises qui sont contre une loi qui divise. Moi aussi, évidemment. Je ne préfère pas, je n'aime pas les lois qui divisent, qui créent des nouvelles discriminations. Je veux travailler ensemble avec tous les Québécois. Je veux bâtir une société où tout le monde peut participer. Et ça, c'était toujours mon but. Aussi, je veux être clair, je suis contre la discrimination. Ça inclut la discrimination contre les francophones et le Québec. Je suis contre le Québec bashing. Je sais comment les gens sont dérangés, sont frustrés par la continuation de la Québec bashing et aussi pour les gens qui veulent faire face à la racisme systémique ou la discrimination systémique, ça n'aide pas de dire que c'est quelque chose qui existe dans une province ou dans un territoire quand on sait que c'est un problème à travers le pays. Un grand exemple, c'est la communauté autochtone qui n'ont pas accès à l'eau potable et c'est un enjeu qui frappe fort à travers le Canada. Donc, je rejette les propos absolument de M. Blanchet et il sait que notre position, c'est on est des alliés pour le Québec, on veut les aider et on a déjà les aidés pendant la pandémie. Et les autres partis d'opposition ne peuvent pas dire la même chose.
In English, please.
Kind of went on along on that one. I'm trying to remember what I just said. Give me a second here.
Repeat the question in English?
Yeah, just
Okay. The question was, Monsieur Blanchet was saying that your party doesn't support Quebecers.
Right. Thank you very much. Absolutely, I reject this notion. In fact, Mr. Blanchet knows that systemic discrimination is something that impacts people across the country, and it is very unhelpful, in fact, hurtful to the cause of actually fighting systemic discrimination and racial discrimination, systemic discrimination, to believe that it's only in one province when we know it's something that exists across Canada. And one of the powerful examples is Indigenous people who do not have access to clean drinking water. That's a problem across Canada. It does not help in making life better for people to target one place or another. It's something that exists everywhere, and we've got to work together to make it better. I reject the notion of Quebec bashing. The communities, Francophone communities and Quebecers have long faced discrimination, and we believe in building a society where everyone is free from discrimination, and that's the type of world we want to build.
Next question, Nicolas Boisvert from CBC News.
Good morning. Just to follow up a bit on Abigail's question, the Conservatives and Liberals both, are putting forward strategies that they say will reduce speculation in the housing market. I'm curious to ask you about the Conservatives want to do this, period where foreign buyers aren't able to invest. The Liberals want to do this 12-month sort of no flipping zone that Abigail mentioned. Do you support either of those? Would you like to add those to your plan? Do you think those ideas are good ideas?
The 12-month is actually completely useless. It doesn't really get at the problem at all. It just kind of pushes the problem down the road. kind of like what the Liberals do. You know, they instead of dealing with the problem head on, they kind of try to distract from it or push it down the road. That's not going to actually make a difference. Getting at foreign ownership or foreign investment is something that we also believe in. Absolutely, it's something we put forward, and we've got an aggressive foreign buyers tax that we would bring in to help discourage foreign ownership, because it's making it so that sometimes Canadians are competing with a very wealthy foreign company instead of being able to buy their first home. We also want to make sure that when it comes to getting at the root cause, the capital gains tax is one of the problems that encourage people to use the housing market like a stock market. And we want to fix that problem, bring it back to what it used to be not too long ago, about 20 years ago, and make sure that people are not using this housing market as a stock market, and so that people can buy their first homes.
Next question, Hina Lam from the Canadian Press.
Hi, Mr. Singh. So I was wondering, how do you expect that any measures that involve making it easier for people to finance their homes rather than supply-side measures won't just raise prices? I mean, we've seen time and again that this is what happens.
So we believe that there has to be a holistic solution. It can't just be one, and you'd be absolutely right if we just propose one solution, that wouldn't fix the problem. We're proposing a suite of solutions to address all the problems. So one, we know that there's big money in housing. We want to get that out. We know there's not enough housing that's affordable, that's in people's budgets. So we want to build more homes that are affordable. We also know that some people need extra help in their first purchase of a home, and we want to provide that help as well. Taken on their own, they wouldn't address all the problems. Put together, it's a plan that deals with all the concerns that people have.
The provincial government here has raised concerns about brain drain in BC because of rising rents, house prices, and a shortage of homes. So do you think 1.7 million homes will be enough for that?
I first want to acknowledge the problem. That is a significant problem. People are leaving their communities because they can't afford to stay there. And I've met with young people who graduate and have good jobs, and they tell me, I want to stay in the Lower Mainland. I want to stay in Coquitlam or Port Moody Coquitlam. I want to stay in Vancouver or in Surrey. I want to stay here where my family is, where my friends are, where my job is, but I can't afford to. And so they're being forced to leave their communities. And that to me is wrong. It shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be that people have to leave their homes because they can't afford to stay. That's why we want to tackle this problem. And we absolutely believe we need to do as much as possible to make more homes that are affordable. Our plan that in total would create 1.7 million homes is, I think, a very bold step forward. We need to continue looking at this problem to find ways to make sure people can find housing, to find homes in their budget, in their communities, and we'll continue to work on this.
Next, we'll go to questions on Zoom. On suivra avec les questions sur Zoom. First question, we have Alex Bollingal from the Toronto Star.
Hey, good morning. Thanks so much for taking my question from Zoom. I wanted to ask you about your policy to roll back in the platform. You call them loopholes that the Liberals have created for heavy industry in the carbon pricing scheme, where you've spoken about them being exempt from paying the carbon price. If you were to do that and just apply, as I understand the policy is, the straight up carbon tax on industrial emissions, on all industrial emissions, wouldn't that lead to job losses and the closures of cement plants and steel production plants in Canada? That policy was designed to protect them from shifting production to places that don't have a carbon price. So if you changed that system and dismantled it, wouldn't it lead to economic losses, job losses, and industrial facilities shutting down?
You know, when we look at the price on pollution, the goal of it is to reduce emissions. And Canadians look at the price on pollution that Justin Trudeau put in place and feel that it's unfair that the biggest polluters are exempt. There are investments we can make to make sure we are creating good jobs. There are opportunities for us to invest in renewable energy, to retrofit and renovate homes and buildings so that they are using less energy, to invest in public transit and the electrification of transport. These are job creators. We can create thousands and thousands of jobs. We need to create jobs. There's no way we can fight the climate crisis without creating jobs. But it doesn't make sense if we want to tackle emissions that there is a plan, that a price on pollution that exempts the biggest polluters. That doesn't sit well with Canadians. That doesn't sit well with people here in BC who have seen the ravages of forest fires that have meant that we've lost an entire community of Lytton, where people can't even breathe the air, where people can't see the sky. We've seen the direct impacts of the climate crisis, and it doesn't make sense to try to tackle this crisis by exempting the biggest polluters. There is a better way, and that's what we're putting forward.
So just as a follow-up then, if you were to eliminate that exemption, though, are you okay with the fact that experts say this would lead to closures and job losses in the industries where the exemptions applies? Are you comfortable with that in the name of reducing emissions?
Our plan is to reduce emissions, and we absolutely know that we need to do that, but will never go down a path that leaves workers behind. So we believe at the same time, government has a responsibility to make investments so that we create jobs and we maintain jobs. There is a way to do that. I don't accept kind of the approach that the Liberals have taken for a long time, that it's just too hard to do. We can't fix this problem. It's something we can't achieve. I don't agree with that. I think that Liberals want people to believe that it's impossible to actually make things better, that there's no way to fix this unless we make people lose their jobs. I don't buy that. I believe that we can fix this problem, and we need to. We've got to tackle the climate crisis, and we've got to be willing to make tough decisions. But for New Democrats, we're a workers' parties. We'll never leave workers behind. We will always invest in creating good jobs.
Prochaine question, Mylène Crête du Devoir.
Bonjour, Monsieur Singh.
Bonjour.
Je voulais savoir, Monsieur Trudeau a annoncé ce matin un nouveau transfert fédéral pour la santé mentale donc ce serait un transfert de 4,5 milliards de dollars sur 5 ans pour les provinces. J'aurais aimé savoir ce que vous pensez de cette promesse. Est-ce que vous pensez que c'est la voie qu'on doit prendre?
Avec les promesses de Justin Trudeau en général, le grand problème, il donne des belles paroles souvent. Il dit des bonnes choses, mais ses actions ne rassemblent pas ses paroles. Et c'est toujours le cas. Il a promis dans la dernière élection de 2019 de créer une assurance médicaments universelle. Et la première fois qu'il a eu l'opportunité de voter pour ce projet de loi, pour l'assurance médicaments universelle, il a voté contre. Donc, le grand problème avec toutes les promesses de Justin Trudeau, c'est comment on peut croire qu'il va le faire quand il a promis des grandes choses souvent et ne livre pas la marchandise. Pour nous, les néo-démocrates, on comprend comment la santé mentale, c'est un grand problème parce que c'était toujours difficile d'avoir accès aux services de soins de santé mentale. Et maintenant, c'est plus encore difficile à cause de la pandémie. Les gens sont isolés, les gens font face à des grandes difficultés et la santé mentale a été frappée fort. Donc, ce qu'on propose, c'est d'améliorer nos soins de santé, investir pour plus de ressources et ça doit inclure les soins de santé mentale aussi.
En deuxième question, j'aimerais savoir, M. Trudeau s'est dit ouvert à travailler notamment avec la Colombie-Britannique qui aimerait voir une décriminalisation des opioïdes. J'aimerais savoir qu'est-ce que vous pensez de cette question. Est-ce que vous êtes d'accord avec ça? Et ça me semble être nouveau comme position de la part de M. Trudeau.
Merci pour la question. J'étais toujours en faveur d'une approche différente pour aider les gens qui font face à des dépendances. On a vu l'approche dans le passé ne fonctionne pas. On a une crise d'opioïdes et on a perdu plusieurs des vies. Et l'approche de la criminalisation des gens ne fonctionne pas. Cette approche a déjà montré qu'elle ne fonctionne. Donc, ce que je veux faire, c'est de répondre aux besoins des gens avec la compassion, avec les soins de santé, avec la réhabilitation, au lieu d'une approche de justice criminelle. Parce que ce sont les gens qui ont besoin d'aide et ça va sauver leur vie, mais aussi protéger les communautés. Donc notre approche va être différente que les libéraux et les conservateurs. On veut répondre avec une approche de santé et de compassion au lieu de justice criminelle.
Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
Before I begin, I'd like to quickly comment on news from the OECD and Statistics Canada showing poor economic performance. These reports give us a sobering reminder of the fragility of our economy. It confirms what Canadians already knew. Under Justin Trudeau, Canada's economy is getting worse, not better. Life is getting harder, not easier. Under Justin Trudeau, we are heading further down the road of recession, not the road to recovery. Only Canada's recovery plan will stop the out-of-control spending, borrowing, and debt that's gotten us into this mess. Only Canada's Conservatives have a serious, detailed plan to secure a better economic future for every Canadian. A better future is possible, a future of growth, better wages, and greater prosperity for ordinary Canadians. Avant de commencer, j'aimerais commenter les nouvelles de l'OCDE et de Statistique Canada sur la mauvaise performance économique. Ces rapports nous rappellent la fragilité de notre économie. Ils confirment ce que les Canadiens savent déjà. Sous Justin Trudeau, l'économie canadienne va plus mal. Elle ne s'améliore pas. La vie devient plus difficile, pas le contraire. Sous Justin Trudeau, on va vers la récession, non vers la reprise. Seul le plan de rétablissement du Canada va mettre fin aux dépenses, aux emprunts et à la dette hors de contrôle qui nous ont placés dans cette situation. Seuls les conservateurs ont un plan sérieux et détaillé pour agir pour un meilleur avenir économique pour tous les Canadiens. Canada's Conservatives supported emergency spending in response to the pandemic. Extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures, but it can't go on forever. What's prudent in an emergency is reckless out of one. For Justin Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh, the big spending of the past 6 years is just the beginning. For Canada's Conservatives, it must be brought back under control while maintaining the essential services on which so many depend. Les conservateurs ont soutenu les dépenses d'urgence en réponse à la pandémie. À situation extraordinaire, réponse extraordinaire. Mais ça ne peut pas durer indéfiniment. Ce qui est prudent dans une situation d'urgence est imprudent sans urgence. Pour Justin Trudeau et Jagmeet Singh, les dépenses des dernières années ne sont qu'un début. Pour les conservateurs, il faut les contrôler, mais tout en maintenant les services essentiels dont nous avons besoin. Justin Trudeau has no plan to deal with the rapid rising cost of living. He's borrowing over $400 million each and every day. Money we will have to pay back. That sort of borrowing puts our recovery at risk and makes it harder for families to make ends meet. And what does he have to show for it? Canada has spent more than any other major economy, $500 billion more over 2 years, and our results are amongst the worst. Canada's unemployment rate sits at 7.5%. That's dramatically higher than the United Kingdom and Germany. Mr. Trudeau missed his own jobs recovery target by over 340,000 jobs. Le Canada dépense toujours plus, 500 milliards de dollars de plus en 2 ans. Mais nos résultats sont parmi les pires. Le taux de chômage du Canada est de 7,5%. C'est plus que le taux de chômage du Royaume-Uni et de l'Allemagne. Trudeau a aussi raté sa cible de 340 000 emplois. Total federal debt has doubled to $1.4 trillion in just 4 years. That's $93,000 of debt for every family in Canada. Over the next 4 years, if Mr. Trudeau keeps spending at the same rate he did from 2016 to 2019, he will triple Canada's total debt to $1.8 trillion, almost 90% of GDP by 2025. When you run endless and reckless deficits, when you rack up that much debt, when you don't have a plan to balance the budget, inflation goes up. The cost of everything, including gas and groceries, goes up. You also put our social safety net at risk. You saddle future generations with that debt, our children and their children. And Canada is left more vulnerable to future emergencies. L'inflation augmente. Le coût de l'essence et de l'épicerie augmente. Mais notre filet de sécurité sociale est de plus en plus en danger. Les futures générations vont devoir payer cette dette, nos enfants et leurs enfants. Et le Canada est plus vulnérable aux futures urgences. As a father of two, I want to leave a better Canada for my children. Business as usual isn't good enough. Canadians need more. Canada needs more. Only Canada's Conservatives have a plan to get spending under control and balance the budget. Canada's recovery plan will secure Canada's finances by adopting a responsible, measured, and disciplined approach to balancing the budget over the next decade. Our plan will rein in deficits to address inflation and the rising cost of necessities for Canadian families. Once we've got the recovery underway, we will take a responsible and compassionate approach to winding down emergency pandemic supports as more people get back to work. Le plan de rétablissement du Canada va agir pour les finances du Canada. On va avoir une approche mesurée et responsable pour équilibrer le budget au cours de la prochaine décennie. Notre plan va contrôler les déficits, l'inflation et l'augmentation du coût de la vie. On pense aux familles, aux entrepreneurs et aux travailleurs. Quand la reprise économique sera bien en place, on va adopter une approche responsable pour éliminer les mesures d'urgence de la pandémie. On va le faire de manière graduelle et pendant que les gens retournent travailler. As we wind down these programs, we will replace them with our job surge, which will provide an incentive for companies to hire. And we will make targeted investments in stimulus measures, including investing in infrastructure projects, to help create jobs and make our communities better places to live. We will get our economy firing on all cylinders again and get it growing again after years of slow growth under Justin Trudeau. More jobs and more growth means more revenue for the public services we rely on. And we will keep spending under control. Even before COVID, Mr. Trudeau was running huge deficits as he grew spending by 6.5% per year. We'll grow spending in a few key areas, like healthcare and wellness, while keeping it under control everywhere else. Plus d'emplois et plus de croissance vont créer plus de revenus pour les services publics. On va contrôler les dépenses. Même avant la COVID-19, Trudeau accusait de gros déficits. Il a augmenté les dépenses de 6,5% par année. On va augmenter les dépenses dans les domaines clés, comme les soins de santé, et on va les contrôler dans d'autres domaines. Our plan is clear. Get Canadians back to work. Responsibly wind down emergency supports, get the economy growing, restrain the growth for spending. I believe Canada's best days are on the horizon. I believe we can build a better Canada for ourselves and for our children. I believe we can get the country back to work. Canada's Conservatives are the only party in this election with a responsible plan to get the budget balanced. The choice between our plan to control inflation and protect our social programs and the three parties who will give us endless deficits and higher prices for families is clear. Canada's recovery plan will get Canada surging in the right direction. Canada's recovery plan will ensure no Canadian is left behind. Les Canadiens ont deux choix. D'un côté, les conservateurs avec notre plan pour contrôler l'inflation et protéger nos programmes sociaux. Et de l'autre, 4 partis qui vont nous donner des déficits et des prix plus élevés. Le plan de rétablissement va remettre le Canada sur les rails. Canada's recovery plan will secure the future for all Canadians. Let's get to work. On va agir pour l'avenir. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
We will now be taking questions. Allons maintenant prendre des questions. First question.
Mr. O'Toole, good afternoon. Omar Sachedina from CTV News. You're pledging to balance the budget in 10 years. In which areas specifically are you planning cuts?
Canada's recovery plan will get the country back to work in all sectors of the economy and in all regions of the country. We're the only party that wants to get everyone back to work. We will help highly affected sectors caught by this pandemic so that those jobs are preserved. We will grow the economy so that we can get back to balance in a responsible and equitable way without cuts. That is our plan. It's why we launched it on the first full day of this campaign. Every Canadian family deserves a recovery.
The U.S. State Department is urging Americans to reconsider travel to Canada. There's now a level 3 advisory for Americans to Canada. Is that appropriate in light of the fact that there are more Canadians vaccinated than Americans?
We need to make sure that we keep our economy open and the border open safely, especially for border communities that rely on that for tourism, for travel. We can do that by leveraging the levels of vaccination, of course, in our country and in the United States, but also faster access with daily rapid testing. This is something that the Trudeau government was very slow to move on. We've been calling for a secure and safe approach to our border for months now. It's critical that we keep our economy moving while maintaining public safety for Canadians, and I think this is something the government needs to demonstrate. They have not delivered. We will deliver. On doit avoir une réouverture sécuritaire. Nos frontières sont très importantes pour l'économie et on doit utiliser les vaccins et les tests de dépistage rapides à la frontière parce que notre économie et le commerce international avec les États-Unis est très important pour une relance économique. On va agir pour une frontière sécuritaire ciblée sur le bien-être des Canadiens et une reprise économique.
Next question.
Hello, Mr. O'Toole. Menaka Raymond-Wilms, The Globe and Mail. A few days ago, Ryerson University in Toronto announced it will change the school's name because of its namesake's history. Given that last year you retracted comments you made about residential schools and Ryerson University's namesake, I'm wondering, Mr. O'Toole, what your response is to this name change.
I'll always respect institutions, governments making decisions about their own institution and their approach to reconciliation. I've said these conversations have to learn from our history, not try and erase it, but they have to be responsible conversations, and even I have to hold myself to making sure that's the case. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission said that understanding our history is important to make sure we can build a path to reconciliation. So I invite people to make sure that as we commit to reconciliation, we try and learn from our past and not erase it, but try and make sure we all commit to reconciliation as we build a better country, particularly for Indigenous peoples and First Nations. On doit apprendre les leçons de notre histoire. On doit apprendre par effacer notre histoire. C'était une recommandation dans le rapport de la réconciliation et la vérité, parce qu'on a une approche, tous les Canadiens et Canadiennes, sur la route de la réconciliation. C'est un enjeu important pour notre pays et je vais respecter les décisions par les institutions.
Mr. O'Toole, you've also criticized the Liberal decision to rename the Langevin building in Ottawa, which houses the Prime Minister's office, as an example of cancel culture and the radical left. Would you reverse that decision? And how would you respond to calls to rename federal buildings that are named after historical figures with controversial past?
As I said, I think we have to learn from our history and try and make sure we commit today and in the future to the path of reconciliation. Several years ago, when Mr. Trudeau made that decision without any debate, without any discussion. He was actually not learning from our history. And I proposed a measure where we could do that, where we could have responsible discussions about our past and our commitment to reconciliation today. That's what I think we should be doing, and that is what I will do as Prime Minister, bring people together to learn from our history, to make sure that we commit today to reconciliation. It's why, as opposition leader, my first question in the House of Commons was on reconciliation. Canada's recovery plan has some incredible ideas that have come to me from First Nation leaders. We need to all walk the road to reconciliation together, and I will lead as Prime Minister.
Prochaine question.
Bonjour, Louis Blouin de Radio-Canada. Monsieur O'Toole, si vous êtes porté au gouvernement, est-ce que vous vous engagez à ne mettre aucun argent public de manière directe ou indirecte dans une contestation de la loi sur la laïcité au Québec?
Merci pour la question. Je ne contesterai pas une loi de l'Assemblée nationale. C'est clair, c'est dans mon contrat avec les Québécois et les Québécoises. Je vais toujours respecter les champs des compétences des provinces, incluant sur la laïcité.
Juste pour être plus précis, M. O'Toole, s'il vous plaît, est-ce que vous suspenderiez tout financement public au programme fédéral de contestation judiciaire ou à tout autre organisme qui pourrait contester cette loi-là?
Le programme de contestation judiciaire est indépendant et c'est très important de respecter ça. Et je vais faire ça comme Premier ministre parce que c'était là pour les communautés francophones hors Québec, pour leurs droits. Et c'est important pour ça. Comme j'ai dit, je vais toujours respecter les champs des compétences de l'Assemblée nationale et je ne contesterai pas loi 21. On doit travailler ensemble après la pandémie et je vais avoir une approche, un fédéralisme de partenariat. C'est dans mon contrat avec les Québécois et les Québécoises, un engagement clair. Et les Québécois méritent une voix à Ottawa. Je suis le seul chef qui peut remplacer M. Trudeau, pas M. Blanchette, mais les conservateurs.
Prochaine question.
Boris Proulx du journal Le Devoir, vos promesses en santé mentale, lorsque vous dites que jamais vous ne vous ingéreriez dans des compétences des provinces, qu'est-ce que vous feriez si une province refuse de bonifier ses aides en santé mentale avec l'argent que vous leur transférez?
Merci pour la question. Comme j'ai dit, et c'est dans mon plan pour le rétablissement du Canada, je vais transférer les transferts en santé sans condition et avec une augmentation de 6% minimum. Un investissement historique et c'est pour le Québec de prendre les décisions sur le système. Et je sais qu'après la pandémie, avec les féminicides, la dépression dans nos jeunes, ça serait une priorité pour le gouvernement de M. Legault. En plus, j'ai des investissements pour les organisations à but non lucratif sur le terrain au Québec et à travers le pays. Aussi, on va avoir des incitatifs pour les entreprises de mettre en place des programmes sur la santé mentale. On a un plan, le 3e palier de notre plan, et d'avoir un plan d'action pour la santé mentale canadienne et de respecter les champs des compétences. I will always respect provincial decisions about their healthcare system. In our Canada Recovery Plan, we're making historic investments in our public system, a minimum of 6% increase per year without tying Ottawa Knows Best conditions. I know that all provinces know that we've seen alarming rates in domestic violence and youth depression. I know all provinces will focus need at mental health, but I will respect provincial decisions. But I also have programs to encourage employers, incentivize employers to create mental wellness programs for their employees and to help nonprofit groups on the ground helping tackle the mental health issues that will be with us long after the pandemic.
C'est la journée mondiale des surdoses et j'ai une question opioïde pour vous. Monsieur Trudeau, tout à l'heure, n'a pas fermé la porte à légaliser la possession simple d'opioïdes en partenariat avec des provinces qui lui feraient cette demande. J'aimerais savoir, est-ce qu'un gouvernement O'Toole légaliserait différentes drogues comme les opioïdes?
Non, mais à Westminster, j'ai lancé un programme d'aider les toxicomanes. On doit aider les gens dans la crise d'opioïdes à travers le pays. C'est une crise et on va avoir une approche en partenariat avec les provinces. On va donner un investissement de 325 milliards de dollars de créer des lits de traitement, 1000 lits à travers le pays et 50 centres sur le terrain, centres communautaires d'aider les gens. On doit travailler ensemble, tous les paliers de gouvernement et les groupes sur le terrain contre la crise d'opioïdes.
Next question.
Sorry, in English as well, please.
In Westminster, I made historic investment announcements for fighting the opioid crisis. We need to treat the addiction crisis and opioids as the health crisis it is and help people. So we announced 1,000 treatment beds that we will fund with an investment of $325 million and 50 community centers to help people on the ground. We have to have all groups working together, governments, nonprofit organizations, to help people, and we want to see treatment as one of the options helping people in this crisis.
Chris Reynolds, Canadian Press. You repeated just now that the 6% boost in funding for healthcare and healthcare transfers would not come with conditions. But the mental health care funding that you have pledged for provinces would fall under that umbrella of funding. So I know you've been asked repeatedly over the past week whether that portion of health funding earmarked for mental health will come with conditions. Can you commit to including at least basic conditions for provinces to receive that funding that supposedly is heading toward mental health?
Well, I will not have an Ottawa knows best approach in terms of transferring record amounts to the provinces for healthcare. The provinces know the gaps in the areas they want to concentrate on, and I trust that they will do that, and we will be a partner with steady, reliable, increasing funding. And in Canada's recovery plan, the third pillar is mental health, where our historic investments in healthcare is just one aspect. We're also making record investments in a fund to help nonprofit groups on the ground build capacity to help people. They're often on the front lines helping people in mental crisis across the country. We're also going to have incentives for businesses to create mental wellness programs and supports for their employees. We're going to incentivize that. We're also going to have a federal commitment to deliver on a 988 suicide prevention hotline to make sure that we show we're never giving up on anyone. That's part of being Canadian. We want to be there, and that's a resource we want to see done. So there's a lot in our National Mental Health Action Plan, but partnering respectfully with the provinces is one important part of it.
Yesterday, you said you would ban puppy mills as well as implement a national ban on cosmetic testing on animals. Would you take any steps toward improving animal welfare on farms? Some critics say codes of practice in parts of Canada are effectively voluntary and lack verification, lack enforcement. So is everything actually pretty much fine on farms and no specific steps toward animal welfare are required, or would you seek improvements there?
Yesterday's announcement of programs to ban puppy mills, to crack down on unsafe breeding practices, to ban cosmetic testing, and to work with shelters and other places where we could make sure that women leaving home with violence can take their pet, their companion as they transition to a safer environment. Those came out of consultations with Humane Society's SPCAs as part of our outreach for Canada's recovery plan. Canada's farming families, our agricultural sectors are world leaders in terms of making sure that farming processes are cutting edge in terms of animal treatment. It's important to these families who are often multi-generational farming families. And so we're going to continue to partner with them on their good practices.
Ce sera la dernière question. This will be the last question.
Bonjour, Monsieur O'Toole. Vincent Gosselin du 92.5 Saguenay et Radio Ville-Marie. Au Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean, il y a le cas de la petite Madison Lamar qui est atteinte d'une maladie grave. Heureusement, Santé Canada vient d'homologuer le médicament pour obtenir son traitement, mais veut négocier le prix avec les pharmaceutiques, donc ça prend du temps et ça coûte ni plus ni moins 2,8 millions de dollars, une somme astronomique. Alors, du côté du Bloc québécois, M. Blanchet s'est engagé à faire ce qui est possible en son pouvoir pour l'aider. M. Singh s'est également engagé à aider la petite Madison dans le meilleur de ses compétences. Et la petite Madison doit recevoir son traitement d'ici au 21 novembre. C'est une question de vie ou de mort. Pouvez-vous, de votre côté, aujourd'hui, vous engager à aider la petite Madison?
J'aimerais aider tous les Québécois, tous les Canadiens, incluant Petite Madison, et c'est pourquoi on va avoir un investissement historique dans notre système de santé avec une augmentation de 60 milliards de dollars au cours de la prochaine décennie. Et on doit aussi avoir plus d'autosuffisance dans les médicaments essentiels. Et c'est pourquoi le 4e pilier dans notre plan pour le rétablissement du Canada et ciblé sur ça, plus d'autosuffisance, on doit aider les familles avec la coût des drogues et médecins. Et j'aimerais être là pour toutes les familles.
Et M. O'Toole, elle doit recevoir son traitement d'ici le 21 novembre, sans quoi elle ne survivra pas. Pouvez-vous vous engager concrètement à agir dans ce cas précis si vous entrez au pouvoir dans les prochaines semaines?
Comme un père de famille, j'aimerais être là parce qu'on doit aider nos jeunes, incluant Petit Madison et tout le monde. Et je vais travailler en partenariat avec la province et la région aussi. Et j'espère que je vais avoir une tournée sur le terrain dans le Saguenay. Et j'espère que je peux rencontrer la famille là-bas.
Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Thank you for being here today. I'd first like to acknowledge that we are gathered here today on unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. My name is Jenna Satz, and I am the Liberal candidate for Kanata Carleton. Thank you. Thank you. It is my privilege and pleasure to welcome all of you here today to beautiful Kanata Carleton. I'd be remiss, of course, if I didn't mention that we are just minutes away from Canada's largest technology park, the Kanata North Technology Park. And many of the ambitious challenges that our Liberal team has set out to tackle, from the need for reliable rural broadband to the future of autonomous electric cars on our roads, will be met with innovation solutions from right here in Kanata Carleton. Over the last 2 years, our Kanata North Technology Park has been at the forefront of innovation, from developing remote patient monitoring systems to keeping our healthcare workers safe in the field. Kanata Carleton has met the challenge of COVID-19 with innovation and excellence. However, we must acknowledge that this pandemic has undoubtedly challenged us in many ways, financially, emotionally, mentally. COVID-19 has highlighted existing vulnerabilities in our society, from poverty, income instability, and a lack of childcare. When the pandemic hit, Canadians transitioned to a virtual world overnight. And we lost that human element of going to work, of socializing with our friends, and staying connected with our relatives. Instead, we've communicated through computer screens and through Zooms. As a result, we know that Canadians' mental health has suffered. In my capacity as City Councillor in Canada North, I've heard firsthand the anxieties of our residents, employees who are worried if they can return to work safely, neighbours wondering when they'll be able to get together with friends again, and seniors battling isolation and waiting eagerly for our community centres to open again. And of course, parents worrying if their kids are going to be okay. Thankfully, as we head into the fall with a renewed optimism, we can look towards a post-pandemic recovery and supporting Canadians' unique needs. Now more than ever, we need a strong government to support Canadians' mental health and guide Canada in a post-COVID society. The Liberal team will do exactly that because we know mental health is health. So I'd like to thank you all again for joining us here today, and to my fellow colleagues from the National Capital Region, it's a pleasure to have you here today. And I'd now like to invite Greg Fergus, our Liberal candidate from Hull Aylmer, to share a few more details about the Liberal plan to address mental health.
Et merci beaucoup, Jenna. Bonjour tout le monde. Bonjour, Monsieur le Premier ministre et tous mes collègues de la région de la Capitale-Nationale. Et à mon tour, j'aimerais reconnaître que nous sommes assemblés ici sur le territoire non cédé des peuples autochtones, la nation Anishinaabe. La santé mentale, c'est la santé. La moitié des Canadiens disent que leur santé mentale s'est détériorée durant la pandémie. C'est pourquoi le gouvernement libéral a été là pour eux, en apportant un soutien immédiat en matière de santé mentale aux Canadiens qui en ont le plus besoin pendant la pandémie, y compris les Canadiens aux prises avec des problèmes d'itinérance ou de toxicomanie, au travers de la santé, de première ligne, aux jeunes, aux aînés, aux autochtones, aux personnes handicapées, ainsi qu'aux Canadiens noirs et racisés. Providing immediate mental health support for Canadians who need it most was really a key aspect of this government. Increasing the availability of mental health care and home care in collaboration with the provinces and territories through the Canada Health Transfer. Launching the Wellness Together portal, which has been accessed by more than 1 million Canadians during the pandemic. Soutenant une stratégie de santé mentale et de bien-être à l'intention et en partenariat avec les Premières Nations, les Inuits et les Métis, y compris un programme de soutien en santé mentale et une ligne d'assistance pour les questions liées aux personnes, aux pensionnats pour autochtones et la ligne d'écoute d'espoir pour le mieux-être des Premières Nations et les Inuits. Soutenant la santé mentale des anciens combattants afin de couvrir les coûts liés au TSPT, aux troubles dépressifs et à l'anxiété. I'd also like to reiterate what this government has done for mental health for people who are, for racialized Canadians and specifically Black Canadians who have faced mental health issues as a result of racism. We see how racism can really just, although it creates, I should say, very resilient people, it also can continually to dig at and to worsen the mental health of Black Canadians and of racialized Canadians. I'm very proud that this government, in its 2018 budget, in some of the first initiatives that were ever directed at Black Canadians, a part of that budget had issues for doing research on mental health issues and how racism affects that. And it was research that was carried out by Black Canadians and racialized Canadians. This has led to further budgetary increases for programs because of the research that they've done. I'm proud of this work. C'est très important. Durant la pandémie, c'était très nécessaire. Et quand Erin O'Toole et les conservateurs ont eu l'opportunité de soutenir nos investissements dans la santé mentale, surtout pour les Canadiens racisés et les Canadiens noirs. Les conservateurs, malheureusement, ont voté contre. Ça en dit long. Moi, je suis fier d'avoir un premier ministre et un gouvernement qui soutient et qui veut chercher la santé mentale pour tous les Canadiens. Et ça me donne un grand plaisir à vous présenter notre premier ministre, Justin Trudeau.
Bonjour tout le monde. Thank you, Greg, for those words. Merci, Jenna, pour ton leadership et de t'être impliqué avec cette grande équipe. Je veux souligner la présence de Marie-France, de Gustave, de Mona, de Francis, de Chandra et d'Anita aussi. On a une équipe excellente ici dans la région de la capitale nationale et j'ai très hâte de continuer à travailler avec vous tous. Earlier this morning, Sophie and I dropped our son, Hadrian, off for his first day in grade 2. It was great to see him excited about seeing his friends, discovering they're in the same class. It's a lot of excitement, particularly because grade 1 was mostly virtual. And being able to be there in person was just wonderful to see the excitement about getting back to school. And I know a lot of parents are feeling exactly the same way. But while we're happy to see them getting back to school, we're also worried. Our elementary school kids can't get their shots yet. That's why it's so important for everyone to get vaccinated, to protect our kids. And that's why all leaders need to step up on vaccines too, to make sure our kids in grade 1, grade 2 are safe and protected so we can beat this pandemic for everyone. A few minutes ago, I sat down with Tricia and Amleto to talk about how hard this year has been for their family. It wasn't easy, especially for their 3 daughters. They missed their friends. They missed playing hockey. It was scary. It was lonely. Actually told me that Mila, the littlest one, hi there, caught COVID in her class last year. It was scary, and she had to spend 2 weeks or a long stretch of time in her room, wearing a mask, not able to see her family to keep everyone safe. She got through just fine, of course, but it was really stressful. It was really scary. And as a dad, I know just how lonely that could be. For too many Canadians, that story is far too familiar. The past 18 months have been really tough for parents, for seniors, for essential workers, for all the people who are grieving the loss of family members, for everyone who's faced discrimination or hate. No matter who you are, you deserve the right support, and that includes on mental health. La santé mentale doit être traitée au même titre que tous les autres problèmes de santé. Et ça fait longtemps que notre gouvernement le sait. C'est pourquoi on a déjà investi des milliards de dollars dans des services de santé mentale. Et on a offert du soutien direct à plus d'1 million de personnes avec des programmes comme Espace Mieux-être Canada pendant la pandémie. We've made real progress. But if you've been in crisis and faced a wait list, if you're a student struggling to pay both rent and a therapist, you know there's a lot of work still to do. That's why a Liberal government will invest almost $6.5 billion for mental health services across the country. And we'll make this investment through a brand new, dedicated Canada Mental Health Transfer to provinces and territories. Because mental health should be a priority, even within our healthcare system. This funding and this new transfer will mean everything from shorter wait times to more mental health professionals on the job. We'll also invest in 1,200 new mental health care counselors at colleges and universities, and develop a distinctions-based strategy with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Quand j'ai annoncé notre plan pour embaucher des milliers de médecins de famille et d'infirmières praticiennes, j'ai dit qu'on n'allait pas commencer à micro-gérer les soins de santé. On sait que c'est une responsabilité provinciale. Mais tout comme je crois que vous devriez avoir un médecin de famille ou une équipe de santé familiale, je crois aussi que vous devriez avoir accès à du soutien en santé mentale si vous en avez besoin. Et c'est ce qu'on va offrir. We're the only party with a real commitment and a real plan for mental health. Just think about what Erin O'Toole has said on universal health care. He believes in a two-tier approach with more options for the wealthy and fewer for everyone else. Well, if that's his approach on health care, nobody's going to believe that it's any different for mental health. We can't afford to go back to the Harper era of private cuts and cuts to public hospitals. We can't afford Erin O'Toole sitting across the table from Doug Ford or any other premier. Not on health care, not on mental health, and not on vaccines, schools, or childcare. Leadership is about choices. And our choices? Just like we're choosing a real plan on mental health, we're choosing to make sure everyone on a plane or train is vaccinated and paying for the rollout of proof of vaccination programs for provinces and territories that are stepping up. Just like we chose to raise taxes on the wealthiest 1% so we could lower them for the middle class, we'll choose to keep fighting for $10 a day childcare, including here in Ontario. Because that's what's at stake in this election. Depuis 1 an et demi, on traverse des moments difficiles, mais on était là, les uns pour les autres. Mes amis, je suis très enthousiaste quand je pense à tout ce qu'on peut continuer d'accomplir ensemble. C'est pour ça que je vous invite à nous joindre, pour des soins de santé de qualité et des services de garde abordables, pour de bons emplois et un environnement sain et protégé, pour un Canada plus fort pour tout le monde. This is our moment. This is our choice. And if you're with me, I'm ready for more hard work. I'm ready for hope and for everything we can achieve together with faith in each other, with belief in what this country can be. Let's choose forward for everyone. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Trudeau. We'll now start a question period with CBC.
Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. Travis Damraj, CBC News. Thanks for taking our questions this morning. CBC News has learned there have been concerns raised to your office about MP Raj Saini, dating back to his first mandate in 2015 and a series of cases where he allegedly acted inappropriately with young female staffers or made them feel uncomfortable. You said you have a zero-tolerance policy when it comes to harassment. Why has your party greenlit him to seek re-election?
I've said many times and will continue to insist that everyone deserves to have a safe workplace in the public service, in political campaigns, and right across the country in whatever jobs they have. That's why as a government we have moved forward with much stronger measures both in the public service and in Parliament and continue to demonstrate the leadership that ensures that people have a right and actually experience safe working environments. I know Mr. Saini has shared the details of all the processes that have been undertaken in his office because it's really important that we respond to any concerns and issues brought up, and that's exactly what we do.
And so just to be clear, are you saying that you believe your candidate and not the women?
I have said that Mr. Saini has shared the processes. There have been rigorous processes undertaken that he has shared the details of. We know that it is extremely important to take any allegations seriously, which we certainly have, and we always will, because everyone deserves a safe workplace.
En français, s'il vous plaît, Monsieur Trudeau.
Nous avons démontré depuis le début que nous savons que tout le monde mérite un endroit de travail libre d'harcèlement ou d'intimidation. Et nous avons mis, en tant que gouvernement, des mesures en place au Parlement, à l'intérieur de la fonction publique et à travers le pays pour aider, à appuyer, à donner des ressources à quiconque vient avec des plaintes ou des préoccupations. M. Saini a partagé tous les processus qui ont été engagés par rapport à ces préoccupations, à ces enjeux. Et nous nous attendons que ce soit toujours pris au sérieux et qu'on fasse les processus importants pour passer à travers de ces enjeux-là en écoutant, en comprenant et en cherchant des solutions pour que tout le monde soit respecté entièrement.
Prochaine question.
Oui, bonjour, Laurence Martin de Radio-Canada. Le chef du Bloc québécois a décidé de parler de laïcité aujourd'hui dans son point de presse. Il demande aux chefs des partis fédéraux de s'engager à ne pas contester la loi 21. Pourquoi est-ce que vous pensez que M. Blanchette fait cette sortie aujourd'hui à ce moment-ci de la campagne?
Bien, tout d'abord, les gens connaissent très bien mes positions sur cela. On voit que M. Blanchette cherche à parler d'autre chose que ce que préoccupe les Canadiens. Parce qu'on a un gouvernement fédéral qui a été là pour tous les Canadiens, particulièrement pour les Québécois, avec 8 $ sur 10 pendant cette pandémie investis directement par le gouvernement fédéral pour appuyer les gens pendant cette pandémie. On a fait une promesse qu'on allait être là pour les gens. On est là pour défendre la langue française. On est là pour défendre nos artistes. C'est sûr que M. Blanchette va toujours chercher la chicane, mais ce serait important pour lui de démontrer du vrai leadership, tout comme M. O'Toole, sur la vaccination et d'être sans équivoque que les gens doivent se faire vacciner et qu'on doit continuer d'avancer avec des vaccinations pour la fonction publique, dans un train, dans un avion et avec des passeports vaccinaux. M. Blanchette ne démontre pas de leadership là-dessus. Les gens ont travaillé tellement fort pour faire des sacrifices, pour passer à travers, pour faire ce qui est nécessaire, d'être là les uns pour les autres. Ça prend du leadership à la hauteur des sacrifices que les gens ont faits et c'est pas ça qu'est en train de démontrer M. Blanchette.
En suivi.
Et est-ce que pour vous, le dossier de la laïcité au Québec est réglé, M. Trudeau?
On continue d'avoir des conversations. Les Québécois sont en train de défendre leurs droits devant la Cour et on suit ça attentivement. Je pense qu'une société doit toujours se poser des questions importantes sur comment on va continuer d'avancer ensemble. Mais je sais aussi que les Québécois sont bien plus préoccupés avec comment on va en finir une fois pour toutes avec cette pandémie, comment on va continuer notre lutte contre les changements climatiques. Je comprends que M. Blanchette, ça ne tente pas de parler de l'environnement ces jours-ci, mais les Canadiens, les Québécois, eux, ils veulent parler d'environnement. Ils veulent parler de comment on va assurer que les gens soient vaccinés pour protéger nos enfants, comme mon fils que je viens juste de déposer à l'école en 2e année aujourd'hui pour la première journée. Pour les protéger, il faut qu'on ait du vrai leadership des leaders politiques au niveau des vaccins, ce que ni M. O'Toole ni M. Blanchette semblent vouloir offrir.
Next question.
Good morning, Campbell Clark from the Globe and Mail. Every day you're making policy announcements, more or less, and often they have announcements of funding in the billions of dollars. Would there come a time in the next 4 years when you'd have to alter course and retrench some of the benefits of the pandemic, change the spending patterns? And if so, when would that be?
We have already started decreasing the amount of supports come out through this pandemic because our economy is bouncing back extremely strongly, but not everywhere. We know that certain areas, we're continuing our support for the arts and cultural sector, which is still affected because we can't fill up the theaters to the same numbers that we used to have. We're going to continue to be there for workers in our hospitality industry, our tourism industries that are still affected by this pandemic, even though the vast, vast majority of Canadians are vaccinated. We made a promise during this pandemic to have people's backs, and that's what we did. Despite the Conservatives saying we were doing too much, we knew that the best way to protect the economy was to protect people's health. So we stepped up with, yes, historic supports in Canadians, so that while the federal government borrows on 1%, Canadians didn't have to borrow at 19 or 20% on their credit cards and go further into debt. And what that has allowed is not only we got through the pandemic better than most countries on the health side, We're actually bouncing back stronger as our economy comes roaring back because we were there for small businesses. We were there for families. It's not about doing the right thing or helping the economy. It's about knowing that doing the right thing was helping the economy, and that's what conservatives don't seem to get.
Mr. Trudeau, I asked you to look forward to tell us if you see a point at which the spending that is you're announcing now on top of the existing deficits might be too much, might be unsustainable, and whether you feel that there might be a point at which you have to alter course to bring things more into a path towards balance.
A perfect example of exactly that is our choice to invest in childcare. We know that $30 billion over the coming years is a big expenditure for a government. But it's also a real investment, not just in families, in support so kids get the right start in school, so parents have the $10 a day quality childcare spaces that we know they need right across the country. But it also is a significant driver of growth in our economy as women are able to enter the workforce in greater numbers. Women, because women always carry the burden, a greater burden on childcare. That we are able to actually solve for the growth challenge at the same time. So when Erin O'Toole says he's going to cancel $10 a day childcare across the country, that's not just an attack on women and the fact that they've had it harder during this recession, during this she-session, during this pandemic. But it's also a reflection that the Conservatives don't understand how to grow the economy by encouraging and allowing women to get into the economy, to get those careers, because we have $10 affordable childcare right across the country.
Next question.
Glenn McGregor, CTV News. Mr. Trudeau, the U.S. State Department is now advising Americans to reconsider travel to Canada based on the Centers for Disease Control's assessment there's a high rate of infection here. This will obviously have an effect on a lot of Canadian industries, tourism, hospitality. Do you think that's a fair assessment? And if you don't, what are you do? Are you communicating with the U.S. administration? What are you going to do about this?
We have brought measures in that allow fully vaccinated Americans to come to Canada. Because we know that getting back to normal quickly is something we want to do. And if people are fully vaccinated, they are low risk, extremely low risk. So we want to get back to normal. The vast majority of Canadians, approaching 80% of Canadians who've done the right thing and gotten vaccinated, allow us to get back to more and more normal this fall. But yes, there is a fourth wave, primarily around the unvaccinated, people unable or unwilling to get vaccinated right now, that is cause for concern. But that is why we are continuing to encourage and to create motivation and accountability and mandates and support passports so that more and more people get vaccinated. And that's where the leadership that is not being shown by Mr. O'Toole, by Mr. Blanchette, on being unequivocal that vaccinations are the way through this, is so disappointing. So we will continue to make our decisions around how to keep Canadians safe, and other countries will make the recommendations they need to keep their citizens safe. But I know that the way through this is to continue to lean heavily and hard on vaccinations. On a fait le choix d'accepter des Américains pleinement vaccinés dans les moments... On a fait le choix d'accepter que des Américains pleinement vaccinés puissent venir au Canada parce qu'on veut tous revenir à la vie plus normale dans les semaines à venir. Et ça fait partie d'accueillir des touristes qui sont à très bas risque de transmission ou d'attraper la COVID-19. Parce que la vaccination, c'est la façon qu'on passe à travers. On a maintenant presque 80% des Canadiens qui sont pleinement vaccinés, éligibles, qui sont pleinement vaccinés. Et on va continuer de passer le message que c'est comme ça qu'on va se faire. On ne va pas pouvoir embarquer dans un train, dans un avion, si on n'est pas vacciné dans les mois à venir. Les membres de la fonction publique doivent se faire vacciner. On est en train de travailler avec les provinces et on est en train même de financer les provinces avec des passeports vaccinaux. Nous savons que c'est comme ça qu'on va en finir. Et c'est le travail qu'on est en train de faire. Les Américains vont continuer de prendre les bonnes décisions pour eux. Mais comme on a vu, les décisions que le Canada est en train de prendre et a pris depuis les débuts de la pandémie réussissent à protéger un très grand nombre de Canadiens et on a une pandémie moins grave ici qu'ailleurs dans le monde.
En suivi.
You talked about taking your son off to his first day of school today. A lot of parents across the province are doing the same thing this week and then next week as well. I want to ask you, as a parent and not as a politician, do you feel that your son will be safe in that school? And do you think Doug Ford has done enough to make schools safe across the province?
This was something I know we all thought about a lot last summer as well. As we were getting through, what was an okay summer and very much worried about what would happen in the fall, we realized that the federal government, even though we don't have a direct intersection with primary school or K-12 education, we needed to be there to support parents, to support kids going safe back to school. So we sent $2 billion to the provinces for ventilation, for masks, for extra cleaning services, for larger, more teachers, whatever it is they needed to keep kids safe as they went back to school. And we did that again this year with direct investments to help on ventilation and other things so that schools and provinces are making the right decisions to keep our kids safe. Obviously, I'm worried as a parent because my 7-year-old can't get vaccinated. And the best way to keep him safe, the best way to keep all our kids safe, is to make sure that adults are doing their part to protect our kids. Canadians have stepped up to close to 80% on getting vaccinated, some of the best rates in the world. But we have to go even further, and everyone needs to get their shot. And quite frankly, leaders like Mr. O'Toole and Mr. Blanchette need to be unequivocal and stand with the millions of Canadians who've worked so hard to sacrifice and done the right thing, who are rightly worried about their kids.
Prochaine question.
Bonjour, Catherine Lévesque, la presse canadienne. Je voulais parler de l'annonce du jour. Vous annoncez encore une fois un transfert, c'est ciblé pour la santé mentale, pour les provinces et les territoires. Je voulais savoir, n'êtes-vous pas en train de donner raison à François Legault qui trouve votre parti trop centralisateur?
C'est certain que, de ma perspective, le gouvernement fédéral continue d'avoir une responsabilité pour le bien-être de tous les Canadiens. On a démontré pendant cette pandémie qu'on a été là pour investir avec les provinces dans les systèmes de santé pour passer à travers la pandémie. Et j'ai dit aussi que nous allons être là pour continuer d'augmenter les transferts en santé pour apprendre des leçons qu'on a apprises pendant cette pandémie. Une des leçons qu'on a apprises, c'est que la santé mentale doit être une priorité. Et on sait que toutes les provinces en font une priorité. On est en train d'envoyer 6 milliards de dollars et demi aux provinces pour qu'ils puissent investir encore plus dans leur système de santé mentale. On n'est pas en train de micro-gérer. On sait quels sont les objectifs. Les Canadiens ont besoin d'accès à des médecins et des experts en santé mentale. Ils ont besoin d'appui. Mais on ne va pas dire aux provinces exactement comment ils doivent livrer ça. Mais on veut tous travailler ensemble pour assurer un meilleur appui pour la santé mentale pour les Canadiens et on va le faire en partenariat avec les provinces comme on le fait sur bien des enjeux, que ce soit les garderies, que ce soit l'Internet haute vitesse, que ce soit les investissements économiques pour l'avenir. On est là pour travailler en partenariat avec les provinces, incluant et particulièrement M. Legault.
Ensuite, Catherine.
Et je voulais aussi vous faire réagir à quelque chose que Yves-François Blanchet a dit hier. Il vous a accusé de jeter de l'huile sur le feu avec les manifestants, et notamment en ayant l'air défiant envers eux. Je me demandais si vous souhaitiez réagir à ça.
Bien, je pense que ce que M. Blanchet a dit, c'est tout à fait inacceptable et irresponsable. Les Canadiens qui ont fait le choix et qui ont pris leurs responsabilités en main pour se faire vacciner au cours des derniers mois. Les Canadiens qui ont fait des sacrifices en portant des masques, en gardant leur distance pour passer à travers de cette pandémie, pour se protéger les uns les autres, moi, je choisis de les appuyer. Moi, je choisis de les défendre dans ce choix-là. Et moi, je sais très bien, parce que j'écoute la science, que la façon qu'on va passer à travers cette pandémie, c'est justement en tenant ferme sur la science et en se protégeant les uns les autres. M. Blanchette et M. O'Toole, je pense, doivent vraiment réfléchir à comment ils sont en train d'encourager, par leur manque de leadership, ceux qui pensent encore qu'il y a un débat sur la vaccination. Il n'y a plus de débat. Les gens doivent se faire vacciner, pas juste pour se protéger eux-mêmes, c'est pour protéger les autres, c'est pour protéger tous ces enfants qui ne peuvent pas encore être vaccinés, qui vont rentrer à l'école cette semaine, la semaine prochaine. Mon Dieu, c'est ça le leadership minimum que les Canadiens s'attendent à voir de leur chef politique. C'est vraiment décevant que et M. O'Toole et M. Blanchette refusent d'être les leaders dont les gens ont besoin.
Next question.
David Aiken, Global News. Good morning, everybody. And I don't know if we're in your backyard, Jenna, but it's a very pleasant place to have a press conference. So thank you for the hospitality. Folks back there, thank you for the hospitality. As a neighbor over in Stittsville, love to be somewhere here in Canada. Thank you. Question for Mr. Trudeau. I believe it's National Overdose Awareness Day, and you may be aware that the Health Canada Task Force on looking at this issue released some recommendations recently, and it included a recommendation to decriminalize and legally regulate opioids as a way to tackle that crisis. So can I get you to commit today that you would decriminalize and legalize opioid use?
We have moved forward significantly on measures around safe supply. To fight the opioid epidemic, which includes things like allowing for prescription of opioids, better access to supply of opioids for people with addiction problems. So we're treating it as a medical problem. I was pleased to see many other parties, including the Conservatives, talk about the opioid epidemic, but they won't go as far as safe supply. And that is certainly something that we have invested in and will continue to stand for. At the same time, we've seen a number of provinces and a number of places, particularly British Columbia, very interested in moving forward on some forms of decriminalization, and we are absolutely open to working with them in a responsible way to move forward. It has to be something done right, based in science, and led by folks on the ground, but as a federal government, we're willing to work with provinces who are interested in that. But I will remind people, there is no one silver bullet to counter the opioid epidemic. We need to do many different things, from safe consumption sites to safe supply to better funding for frontline workers to treating addiction as a mental and a health issue, not as a criminal justice issue. These are the things that this government has done over the past 6 years. And as you point out, David, there is much more to do. Okay. Nous reconnaissons à quel point assurer qu'on fait tout ce qu'on peut pour aider les gens qui sont victimes ou à risque de l'épidémie des opioïdes. Nous allons continuer de le faire. Il y a des provinces qui sont intéressées à aller de l'avant avec différentes formes de décriminalisation. Et on est intéressé à travailler avec eux. La Colombie-Britannique, entre autres, nous parle de ça assez régulièrement. On est ouvert à regarder comment on peut travailler avec eux, mais je dois souligner qu'il n'y a pas une solution magique à la crise des opioïdes. C'est bien des mesures communautaires dans notre système de justice, des investissements en santé, du travail avec nos partenaires qui vont continuer à protéger des Canadiens qui souffrent trop, qui font face à trop de tragédies à cause de cette épidémie d'opioïdes.
To turn to another topic, Afghanistan, we have reports of veterans groups, individual veterans. They're selling their motorcycles to help out their friends still in Afghanistan. Veterans groups are raising money to buy diapers for some of the folks connected to Canada in Afghanistan. 1,200, we heard this morning at the briefing. Why, or would you commit to funding veterans groups and other NGOs here in Canada who are doing whatever they can to help those stuck in Afghanistan?
Once again, we see just how incredibly generous Canadians are. I mean, as the world looks on in dismay at what's happened in Afghanistan over the past weeks, Canadians are stepping up not just to exhort their leaders to do more and to ensure safe passage out of Afghanistan for people coming to Canada, coming other countries. But Canadians are going that extra step of saying, no, we don't just want you to settle the problem over there. We want to be part of the solution over here. We want to welcome Afghan families who've helped Canadians, who've fought for justice, who've fought for rights for the LGBT community, for women, for journalists. We want to welcome them to Canada to build a better life. And people are ready to open their homes, their communities, and our country once again to people fleeing violence. And yes, as this government did with Syrian refugees, we will continue to step up and work with all Canadians to make sure we are giving all the opportunities and all the support to Afghans fleeing violence that we possibly can.
Bonjour, M. Trudeau, Raymond Filion de TVA. Deux questions en une. Un, à quand votre programme électoral? Est-ce que ça va être avant le débat de jeudi soir à TVA? Et deux, j'aimerais vous entendre aussi sur les sondages. Les conservateurs, un autre sondage confirme une avance 4 points des conservateurs aujourd'hui, mais surtout 62% des répondants qui disent qu'ils souhaitent changer d'approche à propos de la pandémie. Est-ce que votre message de pandémie connecte vraiment avec l'électorat?
Tout d'abord, comme vous voyez, Raymond, on est en train de partager des mesures extrêmement ambitieuses pour en finir avec la pandémie et pour avancer dans la lutte contre les changements climatiques, avancer pour contrer la crise du logement, avancer pour plus de places en garderie pour les familles à travers le pays à des prix abordables. C'est les priorités que nous avons et oui, nous allons partager notre plateforme dans les jours à venir. En même temps, je sais que les Canadiens sont en train de voir à quel point il y a un choix clair à faire dans cette campagne électorale. On est dans un moment où les décisions que vont prendre le gouvernement canadien dans les mois à venir, pas dans 1 an, pas dans 2 ans, mais maintenant, pour en finir avec la pandémie, pour en faire plus dans la lutte contre les changements climatiques, pour en faire plus dans la lutte pour des logements abordables, dans la lutte pour contrer le racisme, dans la lutte pour inclure plus de femmes dans le marché du travail, avoir des places en garderie. C'est des choix pour la santé mentale. C'est des choix très, très clairs où les conservateurs vont dans une direction contre la direction que nous prenons et que je crois les Canadiens veulent. L'idée de revenir aux cibles de gaz à effet de serre de M. Harper, pendant qu'on les a dépassées, même si on n'ajoute aucune autre mesure, c'est incompréhensible. De revenir en arrière avec un système de santé à 2 vitesses, ce que promet M. O'Toole, ce serait ridicule. Oui, il y a un choix important à faire dans cette campagne électorale et les gens sont en train d'écouter attentivement les programmes, les initiatives et les valeurs que préconisent les différents chefs. Mais je sais que tout comme la grande majorité des Canadiens veulent qu'on en finisse avec cette pandémie en écoutant la science, veulent qu'on en fasse plus pour lutter contre les changements climatiques, veulent qu'on fasse plus pour investir et aider les plus vulnérables, les gens savent que c'est une élection extrêmement importante pour l'avenir du pays et vont participer pleinement. J'en ai énormément confiance. Okay. I think the choice is incredibly clear in this campaign about the kind of future people want, about how we end this pandemic. And we've seen the vast majority of Canadians stepping up to respect science, to get vaccinated, to do the right thing to end this pandemic. And there's a real choice between leadership that will continue to support that and to support those Canadians who've made the sacrifices, or those who will be weaker on vaccinations and on expectations that we follow the science. A choice between a government that has done more than any other government in Canadian history on fighting climate change and is even more ambitious to go further and faster and harder with a concrete plan to do it, versus a party that said that Stephen Harper's old targets that are already on track to be surpassed today. Stephen Harper's targets are good enough for the environment. No recognition, not only of the climate emergency we're in, but of the fact that the only way to create good jobs for the future is to be fighting climate change at the same time. Canadians know that. So the fact that Mr. O'Toole is putting forward a vision that takes Canada back instead of moving us forward in the ways that Canadians are demonstrating every day they want to go, I think makes this election unbelievably important to have now, because the decisions will be taken now as a government. Not a year from now, not 2 years from now, but this fall, on how we end this pandemic and how we build back in a way that is better for everyone.
One last question.
Bonjour, M. Trudeau, Boris Proulx du Devoir. J'aimerais savoir si vous avez un commentaire général sur la tendance qui est en train de prendre cette campagne ou le ton. Il y a les conservateurs qui viennent d'accuser un de vos candidats locaux à Gatineau, Stephen McKinnon, d'organiser une embuscade contre son parti. Je ne sais pas si vous avez un commentaire là-dessus, mais d'une manière plus générale, comment vous vous sentez et est-ce que cette campagne commence à ressembler un peu à la politique comme la campagne américaine de 2020?
Moi, ce que je vois quand je parle aux gens comme Tricia et Amaletto, comme des familles à travers le pays, ce que j'entends, c'est que les gens ont passé une année difficile, mais sont fiers de comment les Canadiens ont été là les uns pour les autres. On s'est protégés les uns les autres. On s'est entraidés. On a fait preuve de responsabilité et de leadership collectif qui nous a permis d'avoir une pandémie moins grave que n'importe quel autre pays de nos pairs. Nous sommes en train d'avancer de la bonne façon. Et j'entends très clairement que la vaste majorité des gens veulent en faire plus pour contrer les changements climatiques, veulent contrer la crise du logement, veulent aider les plus vulnérables, veulent continuer de s'entraider de la bonne façon. Or, les choix dans cette campagne sont très, très clairs. De reculer, d'aller en arrière, de retourner aux cibles Harper en environnement, de scraper le programme de garderie à 10 $ à travers le pays, de retirer les 6 milliards de dollars qu'on envoie au Québec pour le travail qu'ils font déjà de garderie pour créer 37 000 nouvelles places. C'est pas ça que les Canadiens veulent. Je comprends qu'il y a une minorité d'anti-vaccins qui sont en train de faire beaucoup de bruit, mais ils ne représentent pas les Canadiens et je ne comprends pas pourquoi M. O'Toole et M. Blanchette ne font pas plus de preuves de leadership pour parler de la science et de la nécessité d'utiliser les vaccins pour passer à travers de cette pandémie une bonne fois pour toutes.
Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
Okay, hello everybody. Good morning. My name is Jamie Monastersky. I'm the press secretary for the National Chief's Office. I'm glad everybody can make it today. I'm going to introduce National Chief Roseanne Archibald, and then after National Chief's address, we're going to go into Q&A with the media, and that's when I'm going to hand it over to AFN Comms Officer Kelly Reid, who will moderate that portion. We are now going live on our micro website, afn.ca, for the documents for research and data on First Nation candidates and ridings. So afn.ca for all the documents there and the release of the Healing Path Forward. But right now, I'd like to introduce National Chief Roseanne Archibald.
With James Swing, Roseanne Archibald, not zooming out yet. I got to introduce the chiefs. Good morning, everyone. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge the Creator, the world around us, and our place within it, and acknowledge that we are on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, whose presence here reaches back to time immemorial. Earlier this morning, we had a ceremony to pass the AFN Eagle staff to me to carry for the remainder of my mandate as the National Chief. Therefore, I want to acknowledge Elder Roberta Oshkabeosens, Quebec Labrador AFN Regional Chief Ghislain Picard, Gitche-Ogama Grand Chief John Boudria of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation Tribal Council, Chief Lance Heyman of Quebec, Chief Wendy Jocko of Algonquins of Pikwakanagan.
Recording in progress.
Chief Tony Walwati, Algonquins of Barrier Lake, Chief Arden McBride of Temiskaming, Chief Dylan White Duck of Kitigan-Zibi, Chief Adrian Jerome of Lac Simon, Anishinaabe Council, Councillor Lucien Wabanane of Lac Simon, and Councillor Herb Saracen of Pikwakanagan. On behalf of the AFN Executive Council, I am pleased to launch the priorities of First Nations for the next federal government. These 5 priorities offer a strategic direction toward positive and evolutionary change for First Nations and all Canadians. These priorities are set out in the Healing Path Forward, 2021 Federal Priorities for Strengthening and Rebuilding First Nations, which is now available on our website at afn.ca, along with the data on First Nation candidates and ridings where the Indigenous vote can make a difference. The theme, the Healing Path Forward, speaks to the need for a strategic direction toward evolutionary and positive change. There is a healing path forward, and we can get there by working together. That means creating a unified effort on long-standing issues that First Nations have faced, reflecting a shared vision and expression of First Nations collective priorities at the national level, seeking a federal government willing, ready, and committed to working with our leadership to strengthen and rebuild First Nations, which will lead to a stronger Canada. The Healing Path Forward recognizes that any discussion between the Crown and First Nations must have its starting place with the recognition of First Nations sovereignty and jurisdiction, that we are equals as peoples and nations. The Healing Path Forward means that First Nations priorities are an integral part of the national electoral narrative and should be top of mind for all of the candidates and party platforms. The 5 priorities in the document are: number 1, truth, reconciliation, and healing for First Nations and all Canadians. The revelation of the unmarked grave sites of our little ones across this country has heightened the awareness of Canadians regarding the genocide that occurred and the healing that needs to be done. We will be calling for strong action on this issue as part of the Healing Path Forward. We, at the very outset, require the establishment of a healing foundation for survivors and intergenerational survivors. The second priority is climate and conservation leadership with First Nations. As we emerge from the current pandemic, Canada's priority attention must return to addressing climate change, biodiversity loss, and its structural drivers in order to rebalance the relationship with all of creation. As record heat waves and wildfires have devastated Canada, it is clear that there is no more pressing issue for all of humanity. In 2019, chiefs from across Canada recognized this issue, working together to declare a First Nations climate emergency. The Healing Path Forward means developing an AFN national climate strategy that will ensure that First Nations governance, laws, and priorities breathe life into a Government of Canada climate plan, committing to positioning Indigenous climate leadership as a cornerstone of a strengthened climate plan. The third priority is economic growth, prosperity, and wealth building for First Nations. The AFN continues to advocate for economic stimulus, support for First Nations businesses, and flexibility for the First Nations labor market. We need to establish a national First Nations economic growth, prosperity, and wealth building table between First Nations and our federal partners. The economic impacts of the pandemic were devastating for many First Nations. Already, we were among the most vulnerable and were particularly hard hit. The healing path forward means sustained investments are needed to support growth and sustainability. As businesses continue to adapt to the changing economic landscape, they need to access affordable and reliable broadband. This will be vital. First Nation governments require the fiscal capacity to improve the quality of programs and services to their citizens, to improve governance systems that help to ensure the most effective use of the fiscal capacity that does exist, and to make socioeconomic outcomes more equitable between First Nation citizens and the others in Canada. The fourth priority is promoting peace by respecting First Nations sovereignty and jurisdiction. At the heart of every conflict involving First Nations is our land rights and title, our water rights, and our inherent and treaty rights. These rights must be respected, implemented, and honored by all levels of government. This is the legacy of colonialism and paternalism historically exercised by the Government of Canada. Within Canada's economy, conflict has eroded investor confidence and led to many lost opportunities. For First Nations, conflict too has meant the loss of hope and certainly opportunities to First Nations as well. The healing path forward means it is time that promises to First Nations were made concrete through the commitments to recognize, respect, and promote justice, equity, and equality for First Nation citizens, both within Canada's legal framework and through the recognition of our own natural and inherent laws. We also see that we need to see through promises to First Nations that will lessen these conflicts, restore investor confidence, and brighten Canada's economic future. The fifth pillar and the fifth priority is rebuilding and strengthening First Nations. The healing path forward means that Canada must confirm its commitment to redesign its legal framework whereby First Nations governments can exercise their sovereignty and jurisdiction over programs and services offered to their citizens. In 2019, legislation on Indigenous languages and on child and family well-being were the first bills to formally recognize First Nations jurisdiction on those specific subject matters. The pandemic has made it evident that First Nations need more control over their health care to better serve our populations and to eliminate the systemic racism facing our peoples within the medical system. Most recently, legislation to implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples recognizes a wide variety of First Nations jurisdictions and relationships. We will expect the next federal government to work with First Nations to enable them to take up all of these jurisdictions to occupy the field that they wish to exercise. So this election is more than any in the past, involves a Canadian electoral population that is more engaged and supportive of First Nation issues. And it's essential that parties reflect our priorities in their campaigns and in their actions once they are elected. In addition, First Nation voters can and will make a large impact on the results on election night. I commit to working with all parties after the election to ensure that Canada does all that it can to help us to heal and create stronger First Nations, justice, equality, and equity, which will lead to a stronger Canada for us all. Ninanaskamun, which in my language means I am grateful, I am thankful, I thank you.
Hey, Kelly, I'm going to throw to you now. to moderate the Q&A session.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. Thank you, National Chief. So if you have a question, I'll ask you to please put your name and your outlet into the chat function. We'll have everyone ask one question, the National Chief will answer, then you can ask a follow-up question if you like. If you're unable to use the chat function, please refer to the raise hand. So we'll get started here. Mia Rabson, the Canadian Press. Go ahead, Mia.
Yes, good morning. I'm wondering, the Prime Minister and Liberal leader Justin Trudeau has said for years that there's no relationship more important to him than the relationship with Indigenous peoples. And yet on this campaign, we've seen very little from the Liberals and from most campaigns, to be honest, to addressing some of these things you've raised today. Do you believe that there is no more relationship important to him?
Well, I can't speak for him. I know that the foundation of this country are the treaties and inherent rights and the land rights of First Nations people. So the path forward, and certainly the healing path forward, is for all parties, regardless of who they are, to honor these rights. So in terms of where we are in this election, we've just released our documents. So now we're going to look forward to seeing how the parties respond to that. They haven't had really an opportunity to look at any document from us up until today. So now we will begin to see where each party stands and how they will comment and move forward in this election addressing First Nation concerns.
Thank you. And you being new to the role, I'm just wondering how differently you're perceiving sort of what you would like to see from these parties compared to what has been talked about over the last few years. Do you see that there's anything different in these asks than were asked in 2019 or 2015, for example?
The issues that First Nations face are ongoing. They are there's a legacy of underfunding and neglect by successive governments since the beginning of Canada. So we're talking well over 100 years of legacy issues that we have to address. So until these issues begin to be resolved in a manner that is satisfactory to First Nations, we will continue to present these issues as issues that need to be solved by governments in partnership with First Nations. And certainly with First Nations leading the path forward, as opposed to, waiting for government to respond or to lead the path forward for us. This healing path forward that I'm talking about is very much about ensuring that First Nations are really leading the way and telling the rest of Canada what that healing path forward looks like. And so that's why we named the document that.
Thank you, National Chief. Livia Stefanovich, CBC News.
Good morning, National Chief. We're almost halfway through this election campaign, and I'm wondering what you think of what you've heard so far from the party leaders. Are they making Indigenous issues and advancing reconciliation enough of a priority for you?
I have not seen the Liberal document. I've read certainly about the 5 pages that exist in the Conservative document. And to me, certainly that indicates progress, because we know that First Nations have had a difficult relationship with previous Conservative governments. So I'm hopeful that space is being created within these campaigns for discussion around First Nation priorities.
Before this election was called, there was so much attention on residential schools and the discovery of hundreds of unmarked graves across the country. How do you feel about this issue now that this campaign has gone forward? Do you feel like the leaders are talking about this enough, or has it fallen off the radar in a sense?
Well, we have to talk about it. That's the bottom line. Over the next few years, we will find more and more of these unmarked graves. This is an ongoing concern for First Nations. The fact that we're not talking about it every day in the media is not of great concern to me, as long as the dialogue is ongoing, that we are talking about the recovery of our little ones, that we are continuing to look at the funding that was announced before the election, the 321 million, as an investment in that process in terms of healing from the recovery of our children and what our survivors are going through right now. I believe that the path forward has already been set before the election, and that we will continue to pursue that and make sure that there is justice for our children. The other thing, Olivia, that's important about our document and the whole process is that we have had this opportunity to really help Canadians focus on the truth of this country. The fact that these institutions of assimilation and genocide have been very destructive to our communities. And it's been an ongoing assault, if you will, on our culture and our languages. Particularly our children have been the victims of these actions by governments. So as we move forward, what I want people to begin to understand is that all of these issues that we present are actually still impacting our children today. So children in our community don't have clean drinking water in many communities. Children in our communities are living in overcrowded houses, 10 to 20 people per house. Children in our community are attending schools that are not to the same standard and not funded to the same amount as the rest of Canada. Children in our community are being subject to great injustices even today. This issue of the children being recovered, our little ones being recovered at these former institutions, is an ongoing issue. It's not stopping. Our children are still being taken from us through the child welfare system. So this issue will keep moving forward, and we will keep bringing it forward. We will keep talking about it. It will be an ongoing priority because it's something we're going to continue to bring up to all levels of government, that we need justice. We need justice for our children. We need healing for our communities, and we will continue to talk about it. If it's not in the media every day, that's okay. It doesn't mean that we're not going to stop talking about it and advocating for that change for our children and for our communities. We have a vision of happy, healthy children living, surrounded by the love and care of their families, living in safe and vibrant communities. That's the same vision that every Canadian has. How are we going to get there together? This is about children. It will always continue to be about our children. Miigwech, Olivia.
Thank you, National Chief. Thank you, Olivia. James Munson, Bloomberg Environment. Go ahead, James.
Thanks very much. And thank you, National Chief, for making some time to speak with us. The Conservative Party in their platform includes plans to overhaul the Impact Assessment Act based on the recommendations of a Senate committee from a few years ago when the Liberals last changed it. Media reports from the Times suggest that committee report would include reducing Indigenous input and the requirement to consult First Nations, the requirements under Section 35 notwithstanding. I'm wondering if you have any concerns about those plans to rework the Impact Assessment Act just a few years after the whole process was last reformed.
Anything that has a detrimental impact on our communities, whether it's environmental, social, economic, certainly has to be a fulsome process. So any changes that reduce consultation, that reduce the voice of First Nations, has to be addressed by any government. And these processes that governments introduce or they change, we will be pushing back against those things to make sure that First Nations voices are heard in these processes where environmental concerns particularly or socioeconomic impacts are felt in communities. We will continue to advocate to ensure that those impact assessment processes are fulsome and that they take into account the voices of our people.
And now that given it's been a few months since the UNDRIP Implementation Act was passed by Parliament, I'm wondering at this point if you have any thoughts on how that process went. Is there anything missing with the way the federal government is putting UNDRIP into some form of implementation in Canada. What should the parties be looking to when it comes to giving UNDRIP teeth and then sort of the Canadian political and legal landscape?
The foundation of implementing the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, C-15, has to be respecting First Nations sovereignty and jurisdiction. So when we look at the implementation of this bill, that has to be the foundation. It's not just about having an action plan. It is about making sure that First Nations are plugged into that system based upon their sovereignty and jurisdiction. So when we talk about the action plan that has been proposed, we have different approaches across Canada. And I think that's what we have to also recognize, is that not every region, First Nation region and nation or treaty area, is in favor of this bill still. So we have to figure out the flexibility on how we implement Bill C-15 that respects that sovereignty and jurisdiction of First Nations on how they see UNDRIP being implemented in Canada.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, James. Thank you, National Chief. Christy Kirkup, Globe and Mail.
Hi, good morning, National Chief. I wanted to ask, back in 2015, the AFN was engaged in a lot of outreach, kind of sending a message to First Nations voters to make their vote count, and that this potentially could affect the outcome in a number of ridings. What is your message to First Nations voters in this particular election about the influence that they could exercise at the ballot box?
I encourage people to vote.
And just with regards to the Conservative leader's comments last week about raising the flag, of course, they were lowered due to the recoveries that you mentioned of Indigenous children who attended former residential schools. What did you think of the Conservative leader's comments?
I read somewhere that if we kept the flags half-mast every day for every child that we have discovered so far, that the flag would remain at half-mast for something like 11 to 17 years. So I think that the longer that the flags remain at half-mast really honors these children, honors our little ones, honors our families, honors our communities.
Thank you, Christy. Thank you, National Chief. Prabjot, I don't have your last name, Prabjot, but you're from Red FM Toronto 88.9. Prabjot, are you there? Okay, we'll carry on. Brian Dryden, Canadian Catholic News.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for allowing me to ask a few questions. One of the issues at the beginning that you laid out was the reconciliation going forward, and of course one of the main issues there is the role that the Catholic Church played in the residential schools. Just before you were elected as National Chief, your predecessor announced a trip to the Vatican with no guarantees being made that a papal apology will be made. One of the issues also is that such a papal apology be made on Canadian soil here in Canada. Has there been any, since you've become AFN National Chief, has there been any effort to contact the Conference of Catholic Bishops to request that they actually invite the Pope to Canada? Because in general, the Pope will not visit a country unless the bishops in that country invite him first.
Yeah, first of all, it is Truth and Reconciliation Call to Action 58. And it does call for the Pope to come to Canada to offer that apology to our survivors, to our communities. And so I stand by that. I will not go to the Vatican myself as the National Chief. The AFN Executive Committee will make a decision very soon on whether the AFN attends that meeting. But I want you to know that I will not be there. because I know that we need to press the Catholic Church to come, or the Pope to come to Canada. And the process of inviting him, I would say we're still working on that. But we've been very public that we want the Pope here in Canada to offer that apology on Canadian soil.
So how, in what you're doing now in terms of drafting how you're going to go this approach to inviting the Pope here, have yourself or any other leadership within AFN specifically reached out to the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops, who generally would need to invite the Pope to Canada for him to come?
Yes, there was a very clear interest on behalf of the Canadian Council of Catholic Bishops in seeing His Holiness meet in Canada. But to date, we have, as I said, we're still in the progress of having those discussions. But there is apparently an interest there to have the Pope come to Canada.
In one of the things also within this election is that the federal election is when, as you said, when the tragic discoveries were made, there was a lot of speeches in the House of Commons of expressing sorrow and expressing how we need to do better. How is the AFN going to be pushing candidates or whoever's elected government going forward to actually follow through on these statements, which in the past actually have been made, but then they sort of disappear?
Well, we did press the federal government before the election to increase the investments on the recovery of our children. As you know, they had committed $27 million, just $27 million. And shortly before the election, they committed an additional $321 million. So that is ongoing work. No matter who gets into office, that work of pressing the government to meet its commitments, to bring justice to our children, to ensure that there is a healing path forward, that work will continue. I will continue that as a national chief, the AFN Executive Committee, all of the working together to declare a First Nation within their region as well.
Thank you, National Chief. I have a question here from Prabjot, Red FM in Toronto, and Prabjot is having issues with audio, so I'll ask the question from the chat. Will First Nations Chief be formally endorsing any candidate, and what is the most important criteria to win an endorsement? And the example is Liberal candidate Shirley Robinson, who was endorsed by Grand Chief Arlen Dumas for reasons that there needed to be a Native voice.
I can only speak from my own perspective as national chief that I will not endorse any candidates because I have to remain neutral. I have to work with whatever party is elected. So I'm not going to endorse any candidates myself. I can't speak for other leaders. What I do want to say is that there are many Indigenous people running across Canada. And I do want to wish all of the Indigenous First Nation candidates the absolute best in this election, in their run. And at the same time, that's for any party, no matter who they are. I think it's important that Indigenous candidates are running. But as I said, I can't endorse any particular party or any particular individual because we have to remain neutral.
Thank you for listening today. Hopefully, the information that we are providing will guide you towards your decision when it comes time to vote, that you will be able to proudly cast your decision into the ballot box, and we'll have a government that will guide us into the future. You've been listening to Policy and Rights here on Depictions Media Radio, and I am Michael Clogs, your host. Thank you for listening today, and thank you for supporting us with our sponsors. Please go to depictions.media for more information and click on our contact link and let us know how we can help. How we can help bring your story and help bring us to a better world. This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.